The story opens with a sweeping shot high across the tree line of a lush, green rainforest. Intercut is a sequence of images of Jake Sully, a crippled war veteran and former Marine. He wakes up in a giant spaceship on its way to Pandora, a thickly forested Earth-like moon orbiting Polyphemus, a giant blue planet similar to Jupiter. He is one of a large number of passengers, all waking up after almost 6 years of cryosleep en route to Pandora. Drifting out of his sleeping pod in zero-G, he's tended by the ship's staff. He opens his locker, which is marked Sully T. Jake tells us that he has a deceased twin brother, Tom, a scientist, who is to be part of a high-level program overseen by corporate and military strategists to study the environment and inhabitants of Pandora. Because Jake and his brother are an exact genetic match, he was presented with a unique opportunity: take over his brother's contract with a corporate military entity and travel light years away to an outpost on the previously glimpsed world, Pandora. Acknowledging the notions of being free and having a fresh start, Jake agrees to the deal as his brother's body is cremated. Now being transported from the spaceship to Pandora via shuttle, Jake is one of many soldiers and civilian personnel about to touch down on Pandora, some 4.3 light-years from Earth. We catch views of the base and its construction and immense mining machines digging up the soil in a large quarry as Jake ponders his new role. The passengers are all instructed to wear a full-face breathing mask since the atmosphere of the planet will not support human life. 20 seconds of exposure to the poisonous atmosphere of the planet causes unconsciousness, with death occurring about 4 minutes later. While the other passengers disembark and take their first steps onto the base, called Hell's Gate, which is surrounded by a huge perimeter fence, Jake follows them in his wheelchair, earning the moniker Meals on Wheels from a few haughty Marines. He acknowledges through voiceover that he lost the use of his legs during one of his tours of duty on Earth, and while a spinal injury like his can be fixed, it takes money, which is tough to come by in the present economy. Jake goes immediately to a military briefing where Colonel Miles Quaritch is addressing the assembled soldiers and a few civilians who have come along. He reminds them they're not in Kansas anymore, and he tells them about Pandora indigenous population, the Na'vi. Quaritch, sporting a heavy set of scars on the side of his head, says they are hard to kill and practically everything out there will try to kill you. And, while it's his job to keep his people alive, he says he will not succeed in this task, not with all of you. If they wish to survive, he continues, they will have to follow Pandora rules. Jake goes to a science lab where he meets biologist Norm Spellman and Dr. Max Patel, 2 members of the Avatar program. As Jake gets his first look at his own avatar, we learn about the program itself. Humans are unable to breathe Pandora's air, but the Avatar program enables a human to link with their own avatar, a genetically bred human Na'vi hybrid, and function as if they were a Na'vi native. In his avatar body, Jake will be able to walk again and breathe the atmosphere. The avatars look very much like their human drivers. When Norm tells Jake his avatar looks like him, Jake profoundly says it looks like his dead brother. Jake and Norm enter the science department just about the time Dr. Grace Augustine, the program's science lead, awakens in a specially designed pod that links her to her avatar and flips open the top. Norm says to Jake he or she likes plants better than people. She arises from her pod and converses in Na'vi with Norm. Satisfied with Norm's command of the language, she turns to Jake. She tells him she needs his brother Tom, the PhD who trained 3 years for the Pandora mission, but she doesn't need Jake since Jake has no lab experience and has never been linked to an avatar. Jake tries to imply that he's a quick learner, but the ill-tempered Grace isn't impressed. Grace storms off to the base's control room to confront Parker Selfridge, base commander and representative for the Resources Development Administration, RDA, and corporation that oversees all military and other personnel on the colony. He tells her Jake will serve as a security escort on her team while they're on the planet's surface. Grace tells Parker she needs a researcher, not a jarhead dropout. She doubts Jake will be of any use to her botanical research. Parker replies, saying he disagrees, saying they lucked out with Jake. Since he's a perfect genetic match for the avatar intended for his twin brother, they can use his military skills in an avatar body toward the overall objective of the operation, mining the mineral unobtainium, a potent source of energy that sells for many millions a kilo, and can bring cheap power back to a dying Earth. Parker tells Grace one way to help accomplish this objective is to win the hearts and minds of the natives, to obtain their cooperation. Grace argues that many of the Na'vi have been killed by the military under the auspices of Selfridge's operation. Back in the lab next morning, Jake and Norm are linked to their avatars for the first time. Jake, in his avatar, wakes up in a different room with other avatars and staff. Within a few moments, Jake is making his handlers nervous because, overjoyed with his ability to move his legs again, he is moving too quickly and trying to walk, the first time he has been able to do so since become a paraplegic. The human lab workers cannot stop him. A Navi is over 10 feet tall, sometimes closer to 12 feet, and far stronger than humans. When his long tail knocks over instruments, a staff member tells him to stop and lie down again. Jake ignores him and bursts out of the room, and into the daylight he finds himself in a recreation area where other avatars are playing sports and staff, in their protective gear, are performing various duties. Jake meets Grace's avatar, who, better tempered than human Grace, accompanies Jake to the barracks where he is eventually encouraged to rest. Before he lies down to sleep, Jake inspects his neural queue, a long appendage that looks like a braid of hair. At the end of his queue is a cluster of hidden tendrils. When the avatar sleeps, the link is broken and Jake himself awakens. Jake later meets Trudy Chacon, a retired Marine pilot with whom he'll spend several weeks getting used to his avatar and exploring Pandora. Jake will serve as the door gunner on her crew. Jake meets with Colonel Quaritch, who is lifting weights. The Colonel tells Jake he's looked up his service record and was impressed with what he accomplished on some of his tours, including one in Venezuela. The Colonel warns Jake about the dangers awaiting him on Pandora. He also states his belief that the Avatar program is a joke, but that it offers an opportunity for a unique reconnaissance mission. If Jake can find out and tell the Colonel what he wants to know about the natives, how to persuade them to move away from the unobtainium or deposit sand, how to hit them hard if they won't, the Colonel will see to it that Jake gets the surgery he needs to regain use of his legs. The Colonel climbs into an AMP suit, a bipedal exoskeleton used for missions on Pandora, and moves off linked with his avatar. Jake flies over Pandora's surface in Trudy's gunship, along with Grace, Norm, and others. The team lands in a forest, where Grace and Norm begin to take samples of the flora and make measurements. Jake is distracted by his surroundings and wanders into a field of helicadian flowers, which are quite tall and shrink at Jake's touch. Trouble arrives when a Titanothere, a heavily armored, hammer-headed creature, confronts Jake. Grace orders him to stand his ground and not shoot, or else the animal will get angry and charge. His armor is too thick for guns to have any effect anyway. Jake successfully holds his ground, but only because another beast, a panther-like Thanator, has approached him from behind and has caused the Titanotheres to retreat and surround their young. The Thanator then turns to Jake. Grace tells him to run, and he's pursued by the Thanator in a chase that separates Jake from his crew. He loses his gun and is downed by the animal, but frees himself by releasing his backpack. Ultimately, the chase leads to a waterfall, where Jake jumps to safety, leaving the Thanator roaring above him. Jake's crew searches for him, but Trudy says they'll have to return to base since night ops are not allowed. Grace says he won't last the night. It's now night and we see Jake sharpening a long stick into a spear. Jake is being watched from above, this time by a Navi. The Navi aims an arrow at Jake and is about to shoot, but decides against it when small, ethereal, luminescent creatures land on her bow. Later we learn they are very pure spirits, also known as the Seeds of Iwa. The Navi's all-powerful god. The archer retreats. Jake is stalked by a pack of viper wolves. He dips the end of his spear into a combustible pitch-like liquid. He lights the end and uses it as a torch against the viper wolves, who encircle him, teeth bared, jaws gnashing. The animals attack Jake, he fights back, kills some, and is taken down by others. The archer who is observing Jake joins the battle on his side. She kills some viper wolves and causes the rest to flee. She tenderly puts out of their misery some whimpering wounded animals and says prayers over them. Jake attempts to thank her for helping him fight off the attackers. She meets his thanks with scorn, tells him all this is his fault, that they did not need to die, and that he should go back to where he came from. Jake asks if she feels that way, why she helped him. You have a strong heart, no fear, she explains. But stupid. Jake attempts to follow his rescuer up into a tree, asks for her help, and says he wants to learn. He's repulsed and told to go back, that sky people can't be taught. Just then, the Seeds of Iwa reappear and start to land on the nervous Jake. He asks what they are. Very pure spirits, she replies, and Jake is covered by them, making an impression on his companion. When the seeds drift off, she relents and tells him to come with her. As Jake tries to keep up with his rescuer, Neytiri, Zoe Saldana, he is felled by a bolo thrown by a patrol of Omatakayan warriors. Their leader is Tsute, next in line to the throne and the man Neytiri is expected to marry. Neytiri stops them from harming Jake by telling them there has been a sign from Iwa. Tsute tells his men to bring him along to Toshik, father, approximate spelling, and Iwa, mother. Jake is presented to Neytiri's parents, Atukon, Westudi, and Moat, CCH Pounder, who are the king and queen of the tribe, respectively. Jake tells the elders that he is a warrior, a dream walker, and his intention is to learn from them. Moat pricks Jake's chest and tastes his blood, decreeing it is the will of Iwa for him to live with the Omaticaya, and for Neytiri, however reluctantly, to be his teacher in their ways and customs. After a ritual gathering, Jake is brought to his bed, a leaf high up in the home tree that encircles him like a cocoon. As he falls asleep, human Jake is revived. At morning chow, all the scientists, including Grace, are focused on everything Jake has to say. Norm seems very disappointed and sullen. He was Grace's original choice to bond with the Omaticaya. Even the military and corporate reps have warmed to Jake. Home tree sits atop a massive deposit of unobtainium, so Jake appears to be their best shot at convincing the Omaticaya to move, or advising the colonel on how to force them to do so. He's informed that he has 3 months to achieve his objective before the bulldozers arrive. The next scenes revolve around Avatar Jake's training with Neytiri, and human Jake's reports on his experiences via the video log he dictates after every day's activity. He bonds with his dire horse, an important animal to the Na'vi. Jake must learn to mount the animal and connect his neural cue to its antenna. Human Jake continues to report on the home tree's infrastructure and other Na'vi details. Jake has a difficult time learning how to control his dire horse and is often referred to as Sksong, Skown, by Neytiri and Tsute, which he tells us means moron. Jake reports back to the colonel in Selfridge about the Omaticaya's home, the giant home tree underneath. It is a large deposit of unobtainium. Jake tells them about the structure of the 1,000-foot-tall tree. Quaritch sees an opportunity to destroy the tree, but Jake requests he be allowed to negotiate with the Na'vi and convince them to leave.